As I always do, I like to begin with a story. This is about a former parishioner of mine named Bob. We called him Dr. Bob. He'd been a very active member in a previous congregation when I was much younger. And he was a retired family doctor. He had been in medicine until the age of 86. But he was as sharp as ever, even when I knew him at age 90. He was Chinese American, he was tall, he was elegant, his manners were impeccable, his mind still razor sharp. He was always forever curious. Every so often someone comes along in your life where you feel like you have this deep soul connection, and that's what I had with Dr. Bob. Now, he was a staunch agnostic, which actually, after 10 years of ministry with him, is an improvement because he was a staunch atheist. So at least now he was willing to consider other options, and he was always fascinated by my belief in reincarnation. And we'd have these long conversations about death and the afterlife. Now, Bob had been at the bedside of many of his patients as they died. He knew what this was about. He knew it wasn't always pretty. He knew that sometimes people were terrified, sometimes they were calm, and most of the time, at the very end, it was okay. He would often joke with me about his upcoming tour of the universe. He said, "I can't wait until I die and I get my tour of the universe." And he said, "I'll let you know what I find out." I said, "Bob, how are you going to do that?" He goes, "I'll find a way." There's always a way. His faith in possibilities of science and life itself often lifted me in my darker days. This, not to say that Bob didn't have his darker days. He had survived cancer twice. He had not one but 2 heart attacks. Smoking, he told me, which he quit, but it was hell. And a family that was often in difficulty. He had been smuggled into the United States by Chinese parents aboard a steamer during the Depression. One of his children died. And he experienced racism his entire life, from medical school on. He was a survivor, so he knew the value of life. And as I was visiting him during his dying days, he was increasingly curious about the afterlife, and he especially wanted to know if he would be reincarnated. I said, "Bob, what do you want to come back as?" He said, "Sure not a doctor, that's for sure." I said, "Well, you know, you're going to have to try. Do you want to keep living?" He said, No, I got to get out of the way, make room for the next generation. I did my best, that's all I need. I'll be pleasantly surprised if there's something more. He said, "You know what I think, John? I think that life lived well is our greatest immortality." It was one of those Bobisms that I loved. "And well, then, your life was quite a monument," I said, "Bob." We talked about his family and how he wanted to be sure they were cared for, particularly his wife, who was quite ill. We talked about what he wanted at his memorial service. I told him that living makes the life what it is. Living makes the life a reflection of the living. And he remembered the Tibetan Book of the Dead that teaches that any bliss or fears we feel as we're passing through what they call the bardos to heaven are the bliss and fears of the life we've just lived. And we agreed that fear was the greatest demon that any of us are facing. Any of us are facing the demon of fear. It holds us back. It actually can make us angry or sad. And there's so much fear in the world right now. We're feeling this all the time. What was it, just last week? Trump was talking about the annihilation of the Iranian people. And he told me, he said laughter was the invitation to keep living. He died quietly with his family by his side. The doctors turned off the pacemaker. Now, some of you who've been around, I've in previous sermons spoken about what I consider to be my experience with past lives. I told you that when I was a boy, I was living in India, and I went into a temple ruin, and I could kind of go from each room to next room running through it, and I knew exactly what I would see around the corner. I've had memories, often in the form of dreams, about certain facts in life that I've later turned up to actually be true. Several summers ago, Francis and I visited Hastings, a little seaside town of Hastings in the United Kingdom. It's on England's southeast coast. This is the site of the Battle of the Hastings, if any of you buffs are out there. This is when the French Normans invaded England. And they met the army on that very spot, and we walked into the ruins of the hilltop fort, and I had this feeling. I said, Francis, I think this is where I died, and there should be a mark on a stone here that looks like a sword or an axe cut. And she found it, and she said, oh yeah. How's that connected to you? And I said, well, you don't know, but I had this feeling, and maybe it's just a feeling. Now, many of us have these feelings, and I think of the story of Fred and Clyde, who had conversations over the years about the afterlife, and they agreed that whoever died first, the other would try to contact them and let them know it was on the other side. And Fred was the first to pass on, and the year went by, and one day the phone rang, and it was Clyde. And when Clyde answered, it was Fred. He said, Fred, how are you doing? Is it really you, Fred? Yes, I'm calling you from the afterlife. It's really me. I thought you forgot about this. So tell me, what's it like there? Well, you won't believe this, Clyde. It's absolutely wonderful. The sun shines. There are all the delicious veggies you could possibly eat. We go to sleep in the morning. We have a fabulous breakfast. We make love for the rest of the day. After a nutritious lunch, we make some more love. Then there's dinner, and then we go to bed. Oh, my God, he said, the heaven sounds fantastic. Heaven, said Fred. I'm a rabbit in Arizona. And there are those people who you meet you absolutely can't stand. Anybody have that experience? Nobody in this room, I'm sure. There are those people. No reason, just met them. I remember a woman when I was doing my student chaplaincy in a hospital. She was the head nurse of this particular ward I was working on. She just put me on edge. I mean, it was like, whew, bad juju. I had a dream in which the woman murdered me. Now, what caused what? Who can say? I couldn't quite place it, but needless to say, I kept my distance. Even then, she snapped at me more than a few times. All these experiences, of course, can be explained through more rational means. And my problem may very well be that I have a very active imagination, and maybe I should just start writing murder mysteries. But there is some evidence that we live on beyond this life. And when I say evidence, I'm actually talking about experiential, cataloged, scientific evidence. Most specifically are those people who wonder what the past life could actually mean. And so there we look first at the proposition, is there life beyond death? The novelist Ernest Beckert and others thinks that most religion is a preparation for death and some assurance of the hereafter. Religion, he said, serves as a mechanism to handle the terror of mortality through symbolic immortality. Carl Jung, and many of you remember the great mythologist Joseph Campbell, also believed that religion's primary purpose was to prepare for death, or the assurance of an afterlife. Now, that's provided that you pick the right religion, of course. As Mark Twain put it, man is a religious animal. He's the only religious animal, and he's the only animal that has true religion. Several of them, actually. Well, I think UUs might be a little unique in this regard in that really we're more concerned with the life we're living now. That's why our denominational magazine is called The World. The best life we can live now with service and compassion and joy. Not so much concern with the afterlife, although I do notice that that concern becomes a little more pronounced at the end. So before I consider if we reincarnate, let's first consider if there's anything that survives us at all from a rational standpoint. Now, most of the rational understanding of an afterlife comes from something known as the near-death experience. Or in the parlance of the literature, it's called an NDE. The details vary, but the basic memory, and it's almost universal, goes like this. Someone who is technically dead, no heartbeat, no brain waves, experiences themselves leaving their body and floating over their body. People often describe the exact actions of the medical professionals who are working on them, sometimes things that are on a high shelf. They actually did a study of this. Someone opened a computer screen that couldn't ever be seen from an operating table. They were standing, and you had to be like way up in the air, and they saw what was on the screen. They know the language the doctors are using, even if the dying person is unconscious. And then they experience going down the long, dark tunnel towards the bright light. And breaking into the light, they are often met by a form of someone they knew or of a religious figure such as Jesus who meets them there. St. Peter at the gate, I think, is probably the Catholic equivalent of that. If the experience continues, they report seeing all of their life. This is where you get that phrase, I saw all my life flash before my eyes. All of their life in an instant, complete with the sorrows and the joys and the pain, and with the sorrows you caused other people, which I thought was interesting. And if the experience continues beyond that, there's a sense of complete peace and joy. No anxiety, no fear, no pain. And then they are told by their guide or whoever's met them there that they must return, that it is not their time yet. And even though they object, and almost everyone objects, they find themselves back in the body with all the pain and the trauma of the injury or disease. Now, I have known in my almost 40 years of ministry dozens of people who have had near-death experiences. And I can tell you to a person, all of them have no more fear of death, none. And they can't wait to get back. But first, they understand that they were sent back to serve the world. Now, does this constitute evidence of an afterlife in a rationalistic sense? Perhaps. Perhaps those experiences are somehow imprinted on our consciousness as a coping mechanism at the time of death in our brains, an evolutionary adaptation of some kind. It's also true that at the very end of life, many people feel a cessation of pain, that the pain receptors shut down because they realize there's no point. It's possible that the near-death experiences are a physiological response to trauma and death. But because no one gets to go on from that point, we have no idea, right? That's where the veil comes down. But the fact that it is universal, almost universal, especially that the dying person can describe the situations around them when they're unconscious, I think is a compelling way to begin to look at this issue. Now, it doesn't happen to everyone. I remember a colleague and good friend who clinically died during open heart surgery for about 2 minutes. And when he came back to it, I said, another Bob, I said, Bob, what'd you see? He said, you're a little too eager there, John. I think you should back off. He couldn't remember anything. My own faith in the afterlife has been influenced by all these people I've known over the years, and also by the first law of thermodynamics. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. Neither created nor destroyed. Last week I spoke about how we're all made from stardust, right? So what happens to the spark of life after we die? Someone tried to measure that once, thinking perhaps this is the weight of the soul. So they had a body that was they had it on this scale, and it was like, to the micron, and they were weighing it, and then the person died, and they saw it change by 0.0001 ounce or something. They said, that's the weight of the soul. And a doctor came along and said, no, that's just gas escaping from the body. Another myth shattered. Reincarnation, though, I think has stronger evidence, and let me tell you why. The most compelling evidence are that thousands of research cases of young children remembering to be someone in a past life. Forget if you're older, that doesn't count anymore. Doesn't count. Under the age of 4, at the University of Virginia's medical school, there is a center that is devoted to this research and has been for 50 years. Dr. Ian Stevenson began the research after a distinguished career as a research scientist in psychiatry, and he's had this to say, at the end of his life. He said, "Reincarnation, at least as I conceive it, does not nullify what we know about evolution and genetics. It suggests, however, that there are two streams of evolution, the biological one and the personal one, and that during terrestrial lives, these streams may interact." Cases abound when children under the age of 4 recount of particularly violent deaths in a previous life or a desire to be with a different family. When researchers interviewed the children, they could relate details about a previous life, identify places and objects that they would have absolutely no way of knowing. But what's more compelling yet are the birthmarks which mirror violent death wounds from a previous life. One boy told his parents he had been shot in the back of the head. Once the researchers were able to get enough data to trace this previous life, indeed, the man was killed 40 years ago with a gunshot to the back of his head, and the birthmark on the boy corresponded exactly to the autopsy photograph of that shot. Even more compelling was there was a birthmark on his forehead for the exit wound. Researchers use rigorous methods to rule out fraud and fantasy. And there have been cases. But most of the cases have shown that there is almost irrefutable evidence that something is happening to people before they are born that connects to their lives perhaps before. My own experiences, while they are compelling to me, don't come close to this kind of evidence, which is why I don't say, y'all have to believe in reincarnation. That's my thing, not yours. As much as we may or may not believe, I do think that there are issues that need to be researched more. Now, when we get older, it just doesn't work. I don't think you can say that. It's a personal faith, but it may not be yours. But whether or not it happened, I believe reincarnation is an important idea to consider for other reasons. What are we going to do with our lives? Approximately 25% of Americans believe in reincarnation. When Eileen Andrews, who won this sermon topic in our auction, met with me, she was certain she'd known her first husband in a previous life. Indeed, for many of us, that's quite compelling, even powerful. It pulls on our understandings of our current loves and our longings that may be ancient. Now, I believe I've lived thousands of lives. I don't know. Are we the only intelligent species in the entire universe? Perhaps there's transmigration of souls between planets. Who knows? But I attempt in my life that I do believe in that I will do the best I can with what I have in this life. And I do think that a belief of reincarnation reduces nihilism. Now, most of you here believe, and I believe that's wonderful faith to have, that in this one life you have to live, you're going to live it with as much gusto and as much verve and as much a commitment to service as you possibly can. You're going to make the best of this life. But there are those, not in this room, who live the life the other way. I might as well do anything I want and wherever I want, to whomever I want, because this is the only life I've got, and I don't believe in an afterlife, so poof. Well, I think reincarnation challenges that. And if you believe the soul is perhaps immortal and it continues its journey, I think that provides some comfort and solace. It frames death as a rest or transition. Those who believe in reincarnation often adapt more easily to the loss of loved ones. It provides comfort that they'll meet again. There are ideas, I think, here that there are multiple opportunities to learn and achieve goals to reduce this pressure to do it all in one lifetime. I was very much a believer in the one lifetime theory when I was younger, and I was moving like this was going to be it, and I was going to do everything I could. And I have to say, I left some things along the roadside. I was not as close to my children as I could have been. Now, I'm trying to slow down. It's hard because you don't really let me slow down here, but I'm trying to slow down and enjoy life that we have now. I believe in reincarnation because, for one thing, it helps me minister to you. Now, I would never say to you that this is one life among many. That's your faith, not mine. But I do think that understanding it in the context of ministry helps me understand that perhaps if you're going to return, there's other ways that we could look at things. Reincarnation helped me grapple with my fears. It provided me a lens by which I could overcome them. I used that belief along with some really great hypnosis to overcome a fear of flying I developed suddenly in my 40s. My fear of snakes, not so much. Reincarnation helps motivate people to act with kindness and compassion. It's closely linked to the concept of karma. But most important for me as a spiritual seeker and a spiritual director is how I believe reincarnation can be a tool for us in the soul's development, allowing a gradual accumulation of wisdom and perfection. It helps me understand that life's varied circumstances can give us a chance to look at life differently than we perhaps would if this was the only life we were living. Our theme for this month is about possibility, and I can think of no better place to explore that possibility than for you to consider the possibility that this was not the first time you've shown up on earth, or the last. Now, my imagination in the afterlife has taken me from absolute non-existence, existentialism, to a Christian everlasting heaven, and now this faith in reincarnation. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm excited to find out. After we die, we will not be able, despite Fred and Clyde, to be able to phone back to the past and say, hey, guess what? But I do think there's different ways of looking at this, and I encourage you to think about it. Dr. Bob, he's been gone many, many years now. 3 months after he died, his wife died. They've been married for over 60 years. One day in that late California summer that passes for fall, I was hiking on a ridge above the coast that Bob so loved, and the sun hit the shrub oak in just the right way, and it came alive with the warmth of suns long ago. And for some reason, I remembered, and I had to look it up, one of Bob's favorite quotes from Aaron Freeman on NPR back in 2005. This is what he said. You want a physicist to speak at your funeral. You want the physicist to talk to your grieving family about the conservation of energy so they will understand that your energy has not died. You want the physicist to remind your sobbing mother about the first law of thermodynamics, that no energy gets created in the universe and none is destroyed. You want your mother to know that all your energy, every vibration, every BTU of heat, every wave of every particle that was her beloved child remains with her in the world. You want the physicist to tell your weeping father that amid the energies of the cosmos, you gave as good as you got. And at one point, you'd hope the physicist would step down from the pulpit and walk to your broken-hearted spouse there in the pew and tell her that all the photons that ever bounced off your face, all the particles whose paths were interrupted by your smile, by the touch of her hair, by the hundreds and trillions of particles have raced off now into other children, their ways forever changed by you. And as your widow rocks in the arms of a loving family, may the physicist let her know that all the photons that bounced from you are now gathered in her eyes as they race off into the power of life and love and energy that will go on forever. In the meantime, friends, we go on in the life we're given, in all its brokenness and in all its hope. And I say, amen.